My sister-in-law, Jessica, stood on my brother's perfectly manicured lawn, her face a mask of smug satisfaction, and told me that my 4-year-old daughter was dead because of my wife's bad parenting. She screamed it actually in front of my entire family, my mother, my father, aunts, uncles, cousins, and in that deafening silence that followed, not a single one of them stepped in to defend us. So I grabbed my kids, took my broken wife by the hand, and we walked away from all of them that day. That was 6 months ago. We thought we had escaped the poison, but we were wrong. This week, her own son, my sweet nephew, found a secret way to get a letter to us, pleading for us to come back into his life. This is the story of how one woman's deep-seated jealousy burned our family to the ground, and what we had to do to rise from the ashes. Before we get into the heavy stuff, I just want to say thank you for being here. This story is a tough one to tell, and it means a lot that you're taking the time to listen. I'm always fascinated to see where my stories reach. If you have a second, drop a comment and let me know what city or country you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It's incredible to see this community connect from all over the world. Alright, let's get into it. My wife, Chloe, and I were the couple that had it all figured out. We met in a dusty lecture hall in college, fell in love over cheap coffee and late-night study sessions, and got married right after graduation under a big oak tree. Our American dream wasn't about a big house or fancy cars. It was about a big family. A home filled with the chaotic, beautiful noise of children running through sprinklers in our little slice of suburban Columbus, Ohio. And for a while we had it. Our first son, Noah, was a thoughtful, quiet boy with my eyes and his mother's kind soul. Then came our firecracker, a daughter named Mia. Another boy, Leo, followed soon after. Our life was a whirlwind of scraped knees, finger paintings on the fridge, and bedtime stories. It was loud, messy, and absolutely perfect. But the fourth pregnancy, the one that gave us our sweet Lily, was different from the start. It was hard on Chloe. A deep, persistent pain settled in her back, and an exhaustion clung to her that no amount of sleep could fix. I remember coming home from work one afternoon to find her just sitting in the nursery, the room dark except for the sliver of light from the hallway. She was just staring at the empty crib, not crying, just vacant. It scared me. During the delivery, the doctors found the reason why. It wasn't just the baby putting a strain on her. There was a tumor intertwined with the muscles of her uterus. They performed an emergency surgery right after Lily was born. A beautiful, healthy baby with a tuft of dark hair. They saved Chloe's life, thank God. But they delivered the devastating news that we could never have another child. The surgery had been too invasive. Our dream of a fifth, maybe even a sixth, was gone in an instant. That news, combined with the hormonal crash of childbirth, broke something in Chloe. She fell into a deep, terrifying postpartum depression. She loved Lily, we all did, but some days she struggled to connect. She'd go through the motions, changing diapers, feeding, rocking, but the light in her eyes was gone. She was convinced she'd failed me. "I can't give you the big family you always wanted, Ethan," she'd whisper at night, her voice thick with tears. I held her, I told her she was everything I ever wanted, that our 4 beautiful kids were more than a universe of blessings. But the darkness had a tenacious grip on her. And through it all there was Jessica, my brother Michael's wife. From the day I introduced Chloe to the family, Jessica had her knives out, polished and ready. She had married my brother later in life after a long and, from what we heard, difficult struggle with infertility. Chloe's seemingly effortless ability to have children was, I think, a personal affront to her. I remember at our first baby shower for Noah, Jessica gave us a set of beige, boring onesies and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Well, I suppose you'll need practical things since you'll be having so many you won't have time for cute." The digs were constant. She criticized Chloe's cooking, made comments about our starter home, and worst of all, she targeted our kids. She called Noah a nerd for being a state chess champion at 9 years old. He should be outside, getting dirty, not staring at a stupid board all day, she'd say with a dismissive wave. It's not healthy. We tried to ignore it. Michael always made excuses. That's just Jess, he'd say with an uncomfortable shrug. She's just sensitive about the kid thing. She doesn't mean anything by it. But she did. We knew she did. Every comment was a carefully aimed dart. Then the unthinkable happened. It was a sunny Tuesday afternoon in late spring. Chloe had finally been having a good week. She took the kids to the park to burn off some energy. I was in a quarterly budget meeting at work, my phone on silent, when I felt it vibrate incessantly in my pocket. I finally excused myself, annoyed, and saw a dozen missed calls from Chloe, and then one from the hospital. The world tilted. The drive there was a blur. The sterile smell of the emergency room. A doctor with kind, sad eyes. A driver who was texting. A car that jumped the curb. Our sweet, vibrant 4-year-old Lily was gone. The weeks that followed are a gray fog of grief and numbness. We were just surviving, minute by minute, for our other children, who were trying to make sense of a world where their little sister had simply vanished. But even in our darkest hour, Jessica's jealousy found a way to fester. And it was all about to come to a head at a family barbecue that would change our lives forever. What could possibly go wrong at a simple family get-together, meant to bring us all closer? As it turns out, everything. It was Labor Day weekend, a suffocatingly hot and humid day 6 months after we buried our daughter. The invitation from my brother Michael had felt like a summons more than an olive branch. "Just a casual barbecue, Ethan," he'd said on the phone, his voice strained with forced cheerfulness. "The whole family will be here. It'll be good for the kids to see their cousins. Everyone's worried about you guys." That last part felt like a subtle accusation. "You're grieving too hard, you're isolating yourselves." Chloe and I were hesitant. The thought of facing a crowd, of enduring the pitying looks and awkward silences, felt like walking on broken glass. But we looked at our 3 surviving children, Noah, Mia, and Leo, who had been walking on eggshells in their own home, and we knew my brother was right about one thing. They needed some sense of normalcy. They needed to feel like kids again. So with a deep, weary sigh, we agreed. The moment we pulled into their driveway in their upscale subdivision, I felt the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Their house was twice the size of ours, their lawn a perfect carpet of green. It was Jessica's kingdom. She greeted us at the door, her pregnant belly prominent, a symbol of the life she was creating while ours had been so brutally diminished. She gave Chloe a clinical once-over, her eyes lingering on the dark circles under Chloe's eyes. "Oh, you came," she said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "I'm so glad you felt up to it. We were all starting to think you'd never leave the house again." It wasn't a welcome. It was a judgment. We ignored it and headed to the backyard. The scene was a picture of idyllic American suburbia. The smell of charcoal and sizzling burgers filled the air. Kids were shouting and splashing in their enormous in-ground pool. Uncles were gathered around a cooler, arguing good-naturedly about the Cleveland Browns. For a fleeting, deceptive moment it felt normal. Our kids' faces lit up with genuine smiles for the first time in weeks when they saw their cousins. They immediately stripped down to their swimsuits and cannonballed into the pool, their laughter a balm to my aching soul. Chloe and I found a quiet corner on the patio, nursing plastic cups of iced tea, just trying to breathe and exist without shattering. The family members who approached us did so with a kind of gentle awkwardness, offering vague condolences and then quickly changing the subject, clearly uncomfortable with our raw, visible grief. The trouble started about an hour later, as it always did, with something small. A group of kids, a mix of ours and theirs, came running up to me from the front of the house, their faces a perfect blend of excitement and guilt. Dad, there was an accident," Noah said, refusing to meet my eyes. My heart, which now lived permanently in my throat, leaped. But they led me around the side of the house to my new pickup truck, the first new vehicle I'd ever bought, a symbol of years of hard work. A long, jagged white scratch ran the entire length of the passenger side door, gleaming against the dark blue paint. They'd been racing some metal Tonka trucks down the slight incline of the driveway. One had gotten away from them. I took a deep, steadying breath. "It's just metal and paint," I told myself. "It can be fixed." I gathered all the kids involved, my sons and my nephews, into a small circle. I made sure my voice was calm. "Hey guys, I know you didn't mean to do this and I'm not angry, but we have to be more careful around cars. This is very expensive to fix, and it's important to respect other people's property. Okay?" I was being firm but fair. I wasn't yelling. I was trying to turn it into a teaching moment. That's when Jessica stormed over from the patio, a plate of potato salad in one hand, her face a mask of indignation. "What do you think you're doing?" she snapped, planting herself in front of me. "I'm talking to the kids about the big scratch on my truck, Jessica," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. You have no right to lecture my children, she shouted, her voice rising, instantly drawing the attention of everyone nearby. I'm sure it was your kids' fault anyway. They're the ones who are always so wild and unsupervised. Chloe, who had followed me out, stepped forward, her protective instincts flaring. That's not fair, Jessica, and you know it. All the boys were playing together. Ethan is talking to all of them, including our own sons. The argument escalated instantly. It was like Jessica had been waiting for this moment, a chance to finally unleash the venom she'd been storing up. Her voice got shriller, more theatrical. Other family members started drifting over from the backyard, their faces etched with a familiar, weary apprehension. My brother Michael appeared, looking stressed and helpless. Hey, let's all just calm down, he said, trying to get between the two women. But Jessica was on a roll. She felt the audience. She turned her glare on Chloe, her eyes filled with a terrifying, triumphant cruelty. You always think you're so perfect, don't you? Saint Chloe with her perfect little family, and her perfect little children. Jessica, stop it, Michael warned, his voice weak. But it was like trying to stop a freight train. She took a step closer to Chloe, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, poison-laced sneer, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if you spent less time trying to be the perfect mom, you'd have paid more attention that day, she hissed. Maybe that's why Lily is dead. Because of your bad parenting. The world stopped. The sound of the sizzling grill, the splashing from the pool, the distant hum of a lawnmower. It all faded into a deafening roar in my ears. Every eye was on us. I watched the color drain from Chloe's face, her expression crumbling into one of pure, unadulterated shock. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. But no one said a word. They just stood there, frozen. I looked at Jessica's face, expecting to see a flicker of regret, of shock at her own monstrous words. But there was nothing. Only a cold, hard, reptilian satisfaction. She had finally said the unsayable. She had finally found a way to hurt us in the one place we were already broken beyond repair. And the stunned silence of my family was her standing ovation. In that moment I knew our family wasn't just fractured. It was a corpse. And we were fools for ever thinking it could be revived. But what could we possibly do next? How do you even respond to something so vile? Silence. A thick, suffocating silence hung in the humid Ohio air. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 seconds. I looked around at the faces of my family, the people who were supposed to be our shelter in the storm. My mother looked horrified but utterly paralyzed, her hand still clamped over her mouth. My father, a man who taught me to stand up for myself, was staring intently at his worn-out running shoes as if they held the secrets of the universe. My Uncle Jim suddenly found the pattern on the patio stones fascinating. My Aunt Linda busied herself with rearranging a bowl of chips that didn't need rearranging. They heard it. Every single one of them heard the monstrous accusation Jessica had hurled at my grieving wife. And they did nothing. They chose their own comfort over our agony. Chloe let out a small choked sound, a gasp of pain so profound it seemed to suck all the air out of the yard. She turned and fled back into the house, her shoulders shaking. The sight of her retreat broke the spell. A rage pure and white-hot surged through me. I turned to Jessica, my voice a low, trembling growl. What did you just say? Before she could answer, my brother Michael stepped between us, putting his hands on my chest in a placating gesture. Ethan, calm down, man. Just calm down. Calm down. I shoved his hands away with a force that surprised even me. Your wife just accused mine of being responsible for our daughter's death. Did you not hear her? Are you deaf? Look, she's pregnant, she's emotional. The hormones are making her crazy, he stammered, his eyes pleading, not for our forgiveness, but for me to just make the scene stop. She didn't mean it like that. You know she didn't. I didn't mean it like what? Jessica's voice cut in, sharp and defiant from behind Michael's shoulder. She stepped around him, placing a protective hand on her swollen belly, using her pregnancy like a shield. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. They parade their kids around like they're some kind of prize. Chess champion this, honor roll that. Well, look where all that helicopter parenting got them. Maybe if she'd been a little less focused on perfection, and a little more focused on her actual kids. A primal roar built in my chest. I lunged forward, not even knowing what I intended to do. But I was stopped by two sets of hands. My father and my Uncle Jim grabbed my arms, their grips surprisingly strong. "Not worth it, son," my dad muttered in my ear, his voice low and urgent. "Just let it go. Let it go. Let it go." The words echoed in my head, a mantra of cowardice. They wanted me to absorb this poison. They wanted me to swallow this radioactive sludge for the sake of a peaceful barbecue. I stopped struggling and looked at my family, truly looked at them. And I saw them for what they were. A broken system of enablers terrified of conflict. Every single one of them was more afraid of Jessica's next outburst than they were of our unbearable soul-crushing pain. They would rather sacrifice us, the wounded, than confront the person holding the bloody knife. My mother finally found her voice, a weak, trembling thing. "Ethan, honey," she said softly, approaching me as if I were a wild animal she was trying to coax back into its cage. "Maybe we should all just take a breath. This heat, it's getting to everyone." "The heat?" I laughed, a broken, bitter sound that held no humor. "You're blaming the weather for this? You're going to stand there after what she just said and blame the sun? She used my dead child as a weapon, Mom." "Nobody is blaming anything," she said quickly, her eyes darting nervously towards Jessica, a clear signal of where her true fear lay. "But we have to be understanding. Jessica's carrying a child. You remember how Chloe was during her pregnancies. These things happen." That was it. The final severing blow. Comparing my gentle, loving, heartbroken wife to the venomous creature standing before me, smirking. A profound and devastating clarity washed over me. "No," I said, my voice suddenly quiet but firm, cutting through the murmurs. "These things don't just happen. And we're done." I shook free from my father's grip. They let me go, their job of keeping the peace done. I walked toward the house, my family calling after me. "Ethan, don't do this. Think of the family. Don't be so dramatic." Their words were meaningless noise, the buzzing of flies. I found Chloe in the guest bathroom, curled up on the cool tile floor, her body shaking with silent sobs. I knelt beside her and wrapped my arms around her. "We're leaving," I whispered into her hair. "Right now." She looked up at me, her eyes red and raw with a pain so deep I thought it might swallow her whole. "She meant it, Ethan," she whispered. She was happy she said it. "I know," I said, my own voice breaking. "I know. And we are never, ever putting ourselves in a position for her to hurt you like that again." We gathered our children, who were confused and scared by the sudden shift in atmosphere. "Why is Aunt Jessica yelling? Why is Mommy crying?" Mia asked, her little face pinched with worry. I had no answers for her that wouldn't terrify her. As we walked out the front door, the family was gathered awkwardly in the living room. Michael rushed towards us, his face a mask of desperation. "Ethan, come on, man. Don't leave like this. We can fix this." I stopped at the threshold and looked at my brother, the man I had shared a bedroom with for 16 years, the best man at my wedding. "No, you can't," I said, the finality of the words settling like stone in my heart. "You can't fix this. You had a choice, all of you. You could have stood up for what was right. But you chose her. You chose easy over right. And that's a choice we will never forget." As we drove away, my phone and Chloe's began to light up, a barrage of texts and missed calls. They weren't apologies. They were accusations. "You're tearing the family apart. You're being too sensitive. You need to think about the cousins." But how could we ever go back to people who stood by and watched our deepest wound get ripped open, and then told us we were the ones bleeding all over their clean floor? The truth was we couldn't. But we had no idea that Jessica's attack was far from over. She was just getting started. The drive home was a silent, suffocating bubble of grief and rage. Chloe turned off her phone and stared out the window, her reflection a ghostly image against the darkening Ohio landscape. The streetlights of Columbus blurred into streaks of orange and white. Our kids were unnervingly quiet in the back seat. Even 3-year-old Leo, who was usually a chatterbox, seemed to understand that something was terribly wrong. Noah, our oldest, just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. The family we had just left wasn't just a group of people we wouldn't see for a while. They felt like strangers, enemies even. The betrayal was so complete, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on us. Once we were home and the kids were tucked into bed, a process that involved extra long hugs and whispered assurances that everything was okay, Even though it was a lie, the dam broke. Chloe collapsed onto the sofa. The kind of soul-wrenching sobs that have no sound, just a body convulsing with pain. We held each other. Two survivors on a life raft in the middle of a storm we didn't create. The messages kept coming. Guilt trips from my mother. Your father is very disappointed. This isn't how we raised you. Angry texts from Michael. You really made a scene, man. Now everyone is upset. You owe Jessica an apology. An apology. He thought we owed her an apology. A message from an aunt saying, family is more important than hurt feelings. You need to be the bigger person for the sake of the children. Hurt feelings. They thought this was about hurt feelings. This wasn't a hurt feeling. It was a mortal wound. We blocked them all. One by one, with a grim sense of ceremony, we erased their names from our phones. A digital amputation of a part of our lives that had become septic. It felt both liberating and terrifying. The silence that followed was deafening. A vacuum where the constant, low-level hum of family obligation used to be. The next few days were a blur. We tried to create a new normal for the kids. A fortress of safety within our own four walls. We played board games, watched movies, and made a giant pillow fort in the living room. But the outside world kept intruding. A reminder that our escape wasn't clean. On Tuesday, I was at work trying to focus on a spreadsheet when my office phone rang. It was Mark, a colleague from another department who I was friendly with. Hey, Ethan, he started. His voice laced with an awkwardness that immediately put me on high alert. Weird question, and you can totally tell me to mind my own business, but is everything okay with you and your brother? My blood ran cold. Why do you ask, Mark? He hesitated. Well, I had lunch with a guy from his company yesterday, a mutual acquaintance. And, well, Michael was telling him that you've been having a really hard time since your daughter's passing. That you've been, having some emotional outbursts and making some erratic decisions. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Michael wasn't just making excuses for Jessica anymore. He was actively, maliciously trying to damage my professional reputation. In the tight-knit world of our industry, reputation was everything. He was painting me as unstable, emotional, unreliable. It was a calculated, insidious move designed to isolate me, to make me look like the source of the problem. The financial pressure on our family since Lily's death had been immense, with staggering medical bills and Chloe needing to take extended, unpaid time off work. My job was the one stable thing we had, and my own brother was trying to pull that rug out from under me. I was still reeling from that, trying to figure out how to even begin to combat such a lie, when my cell phone rang. It was Chloe, her voice shaking with a raw, primal panic. You need to come home. Now. Something has happened. I didn't ask questions. I told my boss there was a family emergency and flew out of the office, my mind racing through 100 worst-case scenarios. When I burst through the door of our house, I found Chloe sitting at the kitchen table, her face ashen. The school called, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Jessica showed up during pickup. My heart stopped. The world narrowed to a single point of cold, sharp fear. What did she do? She tried to take the kids, Chloe choked out. She walked right into the office and told Mrs. Davison at the front desk that there was a family emergency, and that she was supposed to take them for the afternoon. She told them that we were having some family troubles and were keeping the kids from their cousins out of spite, and that you had given her verbal permission that morning. I couldn't breathe. This was a whole new level of violation, a calculated kidnapping attempt disguised as family drama. What did the school do? I managed to ask, my voice a strangled rasp. They followed protocol, thank God, Chloe said. A wave of relief washing over her face before being replaced by terror again. She wasn't on the pickup list, so they refused. But she made a huge scene, Ethan. She was yelling in the school office, crying, playing the part of the concerned, heartbroken auntie. The principal wants to meet with us first thing in the morning. This wasn't just a family argument anymore. This was harassment. This was stalking. She was using our children as pawns in her twisted game. Trying to force contact, trying to paint us as the unhinged villains in a story where we were the only victims. We had cut them out of our lives, so now they were trying to force their way back in through the most vulnerable people we had. We had built walls to protect ourselves, but it was clear Jessica was willing to use a sledgehammer to tear them down, and we had no idea what she would try next. We felt like we were under siege in our own lives. The meeting with Principal Thompson was every bit as humiliating as we had feared. We sat in those tiny office chairs, the kind designed for parent-teacher conferences, feeling like truant children. We had to explain in vague, careful corporate speak that there were irreconcilable family differences, and that certain relatives were no longer authorized to have contact with our children. We could see the judgment in her eyes, the polite but firm mask of a professional dealing with what she clearly perceived as a messy, dramatic family. We looked like the bad guys, the kind of bitter people who would weaponize their own children to punish their relatives. We left her office feeling exposed and defensive, but we hoped it was over. We hoped that by putting the school on high alert, we had finally drawn a line in the sand that Jessica wouldn't dare to cross. We were so naive. That night, after the kids were asleep, we were finally starting to unwind. The house was quiet. For the first time in days, there was a fragile sense of peace. Chloe was reading a book, and I was trying to watch some mindless TV. Then there was a knock on the door. Not a friendly tap from a neighbor, but a firm, official-sounding rap that echoed through the quiet house. My stomach dropped. I glanced at Chloe, and saw the same fear reflected in her eyes. I crept to the door and looked through the peephole. My heart hammered against my ribs. Two strangers stood on our porch, a man and a woman, both dressed in professional, unassuming attire. They were holding clipboards. I opened the door cautiously, my body instinctively creating a barrier. "Can I help you? Are you Ethan and Chloe Miller?" the man asked, his tone neutral but carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. He introduced himself as Mr. Davis from Franklin County Child Protective Services. "We're here because we received an anonymous report expressing concern for the welfare of the children in this home." The world tilted on its axis and then spun out of control. CPS. Someone had called CPS on us. The words anonymous report were a cruel joke. I knew with a bone-deep, chilling certainty exactly who had made that call. Jessica. This was her nuclear option. After we had blocked her at work and at school, she had decided to burn our entire world to the ground. This was no longer about hurt feelings or family drama. This was an attempt to take our children. They came inside. Their presence, though professional, felt like a gross violation. They sat on our sofa, the same sofa where we had cuddled with Lily, and explained the allegations. The report, they said, claimed that since the recent family tragedy, both Chloe and I were dangerously emotionally unstable. It claimed Chloe was catatonically depressed and unable to provide basic care, and that I had a violent, explosive temper. It painted a picture of a home steeped in grief and neglect, an unsafe environment where our surviving children were being forgotten. Every word was a poisoned dart, carefully crafted from the shards of our private pain. They walked through our home, the home where Lily took her first steps, the home we were desperately trying to hold together with tape and prayer. They looked in our fridge, a silent judgment on its contents. They checked the kids' bedrooms for cleanliness. The shame was a physical thing, a hot, suffocating blanket. Then came the worst part. The part that will haunt me until the day I die. They had to speak to our children. Alone. I had to stand in the hallway, my fists clenched at my sides, as a stranger took my 7-year-old daughter, Mia, into her own bedroom and closed the door. I could hear the low murmur of voices but not the words. My mind was screaming. What are you asking her? Are you scaring her? Are you making her feel like she has to defend us? The minutes ticked by like hours. I felt a helpless primal rage building inside me, a rage with nowhere to go. This wasn't just an attack on us anymore. It was an attack on our kids, terrifying them, making them question the safety of their own home, the love of their own parents. After what felt like a lifetime, the agents, Mr. Davis and his partner, sat us down again. They had been thorough. They could clearly see that our children were loved, well-fed, and cared for. They saw a home filled with grief, yes, but also filled with love. The report was deemed unfounded, but the damage was done. The poison had been injected. As they left, Mr. Davis paused at the door and gave me a look of something close to sympathy. "Often," he said carefully, his eyes holding mine, "these types of malicious, unfounded reports come from family disputes during custody battles or other significant disagreements." He knew. He couldn't say it, but he knew we were the victims of a cruel, calculated, and evil attack. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, my legs so weak I thought they might buckle. Chloe was frozen at the kitchen table, tears silently streaming down her face, her hands clutching a half-empty coffee mug. Jessica hadn't just used our daughter's death as a verbal weapon anymore. She had tried to use it as a legal one, to have the state declare us unfit and take our other children away from us. I know a lot of you watching have probably been through nasty family drama, but I have to ask, what would you have done in this moment? When someone uses the system to attack you in such a vile, unthinkable way, where do you even go from there? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, in that moment we were completely, utterly lost. We had hit rock bottom, or so we thought. But in that moment of absolute despair, an unexpected phone call would finally give us a reason to fight back. We sat in the wreckage of our kitchen for what felt like hours, the silence heavy with the ghosts of the CPS agents and the specter of what we had almost lost. We felt utterly defeated, stripped bare. They had come for our children. It felt like there was no line Jessica wouldn't cross, no depth to which she wouldn't sink. How do you fight someone like that? We were just two grieving parents trying to keep our heads above water, and she was an apex predator who had tasted blood and wanted more. Just as I was about to suggest in all seriousness that we sell the house, pack up the kids, and move to another state, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but my nerves were so frayed that I answered it without thinking. Hello, Ethan? It's Megan. Megan, my brother's younger sister, the one who had been conspicuously quiet since the barbecue. I braced myself for another lecture, another plea for family unity. Megan, now is not a good time, I said, my voice flat and lifeless. I know, she said, and her own voice was tight with an anger that shocked me. Mom called me. She told me what Jessica did. Calling CPS on you. Ethan, I am so sorry. That is unforgivable. That is monstrous. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. She wasn't calling to make excuses. She was calling to offer support. She was calling to take our side. Listen, she continued, her voice gaining strength. I should have said something at the barbecue. I should have said something years ago. I'm a coward, but I'm done being quiet. This isn't the first time she's done something like this, you know. She went on to tell me a story about our cousin Laura. A few years back, Laura had a late-term miscarriage that left her shattered. At the family Christmas party that year, Jessica, after a couple of glasses of wine, had made a comment in front of a group of people about how maybe it was nature's way, because Laura was getting a little old to be having babies anyway. When Laura confronted her, crying, the family did the same thing they did to us. They circled the wagons around Jessica. They hushed it up. Michael made excuses about Jessica being stressed, and they told Laura she was being too sensitive and ruining Christmas. Laura and her husband never came to another family event again. They just vanished from our lives. We had all just assumed they'd moved on or were busy. We never knew the real reason. We never knew they'd been pushed out by the same casual cruelty that was now trying to destroy us. Megan's call was like a crack of light in a pitch-black room. We weren't crazy. We weren't overreacting. This was a pattern. Jessica was a serial bully, and our family was a collection of spineless enablers who had allowed her to reign with terror for years, sacrificing anyone who got in her way. The next day, another unexpected call came. This time it was my father. My parents had been divorced for over a decade, and Dad lived a few states away in Tennessee. He was a quiet man, a man of few words, not one for drama. Your mother told me what's been going on, he said, his voice grim over the phone. About the barbecue, about the professional rumors, about the CPS call. She also told me what Jessica said about Lily. And I asked, unsure what to expect from him. He had been one of the ones holding me back. He was quiet for a long moment. You know, he said finally, his voice heavy. This whole mess, it reminds me of why your mother and I really split up. I had always been told the generic story that they just grew apart. But now he told me the truth. He explained that the real reason was his bone-deep exhaustion with her constant, desperate need to keep the peace at any cost. He told me about incident after incident where someone in her family, an aunt and uncle, would do something cruel, unethical, or just plain wrong, and she would always make excuses, always pressure him to let it go for the sake of avoiding a scene at Sunday dinner. I realized, my dad said, his voice heavy with the weight of old decisions, that I couldn't raise my children in an environment where they were taught that keeping quiet in the face of wrongdoing was more important than standing up for what's right. It teaches you one of two things, son. How to be a bully who never faces consequences, or how to be a victim who never gets justice. I couldn't let my boys grow up thinking that was normal. His words hit me like a ton of bricks. He understood completely. He had seen this exact pattern decades ago, and had made the difficult, lonely choice to walk away from it. Hanging up the phone, I felt a new sense of resolve hardening in my chest. We weren't just fighting for our own peace of mind anymore. We were fighting for our children, to show them that you don't let bullies win. You don't let cruelty go unchecked. You don't sacrifice your integrity for a quiet life. And we knew our next battle would have to be face to face. A statewide chess tournament was coming up, a place we knew Michael and his family would never miss. Would we be able to hold our ground when we saw them again? Or would we crumble under the pressure? The day of the state chess tournament arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched the dread churning in my gut. Our son Noah, a quiet genius who found his voice on the 64 squares of a chessboard, had been looking forward to this for months. It was his passion, his escape. The idea of pulling him out felt like letting Jessica win. Like letting her toxicity seep into the one area of his life where he felt confident and powerful. Chloe and I made a pact in the car on the way to the high school gymnasium where the tournament was being held. We were there for Noah, and for Noah only. To us, Michael, Jessica, and their son Mason, who was also competing, did not exist. We would be polite, we would be cordial, but we would be ice. Of course they were there. It was impossible to miss them. We spotted them the moment we walked into the crowded, echoing gymnasium. Michael saw us and immediately started walking over, a pained, placating look on his face, as if he was about to try and smooth things over right there in the middle of 100 people. I wasn't going to give him the chance. I put a hand on Noah's back, steered him toward the registration table, and turned my own back completely on my brother. It was a small, petty gesture, but it was all the power I had. I could feel his presence behind me, hovering, an awkward, unwanted ghost. I focused on the forms in front of me, my handwriting tight and angry. "Ethan," he said, his voice low and urgent, meant only for me to hear. "This is ridiculous. We're brothers. You can't do this here." I kept writing, pretending I hadn't heard him. "You can't just pretend I don't exist," he pushed, his voice getting louder, attracting a few curious glances. Without turning around, I said one word, my voice flat and cold. "Watch me." He changed tactics, his voice dropping again, this time to a manipulative whisper. "The kids are confused, man. Mason doesn't understand why his cousin won't talk to him." He looks up to Noah. "You're punishing the kids for adult problems. This isn't fair to them." That almost broke me. The thought of those two boys, who were more like brothers than cousins, who had spent countless hours battling over a chessboard, being torn apart by this ugliness, was a knife to the gut. But I knew what he was doing. He was using his own son as a shield, a tool for emotional blackmail. I finally put the pen down, turned slowly, and looked my brother in the eye for the first time in weeks. "No, Michael. You're using your child to avoid accountability for your wife's choices. There's a difference," I said, my voice dangerously quiet but steady. "If you want to explain it to Mason, try telling him the truth for once in your life. Tell him his mother said something so cruel, so unforgivable about his dead cousin Lily that we can never be in the same room with her again. Tell him that when you had the chance to stand up for his aunt and uncle, you chose to be a coward. That might be a good life lesson for him about actions and consequences." The color drained from his face. He looked like I had slapped him. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just stood there, speechless and defeated. Across the hall, Jessica sat at a table, watching our exchange with narrowed eyes. She caught my eye and had the absolute audacity to give a little wave, a small, triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She was enjoying this. She was feeding on the drama, on our pain. Chloe's hand found mine, her grip firm and grounding. "Don't let her," she whispered, her voice a fierce current of strength. "Don't let her steal this day from our son." She was right. We found seats on the opposite side of the gymnasium, as far away from them as possible, and poured all our energy and focus into Noah. We watched him play, his focus absolute, his mind a beautiful machine of strategy and calculation. This was his sanctuary, the one place where the chaos of the world fell away. And all that mattered was the next move. And he was brilliant. We watched, bursting with pride, as he navigated complex positions, outmaneuvering opponent after opponent. He won his division, holding the tall, gleaming trophy with a smile that lit up his whole face, a smile we hadn't seen in months. As we were packing up to leave, surrounded by other proud parents congratulating their kids, I noticed Michael and his family were already gone. They hadn't even stayed to the end, not even to see if their own son had placed. It was a small victory in a long, exhausting war. Driving home, a fragile sense of hope began to bloom in my chest for the first time. We had faced them. We had not backed down. We had protected our son's special day. We had survived. But the war wasn't over. In fact, Jessica was about to open up a new, very public front. And this time she was going to make sure everyone we knew, and even people we didn't, were forced to pick a side. What was she planning now? How could this possibly get any worse? The attack came on a Sunday night, a time that's supposed to be for winding down and preparing for the week ahead. Chloe was quietly scrolling through Facebook on the couch beside me, and I heard her suddenly gasp, a sharp, angry intake of breath. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," she said, her voice dripping with a potent mixture of disbelief and fury. She handed me her phone. Jessica had written a novel. It was a long, rambling, self-pitying post, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. She didn't use our names, of course, but everyone in our circle knew exactly who she was talking about. She wrote about the unbearable pain of family divisions, and how heartbreaking it was when some people can't find it in their hearts to forgive, even when someone is going through the immense physical and emotional difficulties of pregnancy. She talked about how crucial it was to protect innocent children from adult bitterness, and ended with a Bible verse about grace and forgiveness that made me want to throw the phone across the room. The comments section was a cesspool of sycophantic, clueless support. "You're so strong, Jess. Thinking of you." One of Michael's friends wrote, "Pregnancy is so hard. People should be more understanding. Some people are just selfish." An aunt commented, "A direct knife in our backs." They were building a public narrative brick by brick, painting Jessica as the pregnant, hormonal, misunderstood victim, and us as the cold, cruel, unforgiving villains who were tearing the family apart over a simple misunderstanding. I was seething, ready to type a furious response, but Chloe, with an eerie calm, put a hand on my arm. "Don't," she said. Let them show the world who they are." But our protector, our warrior, Megan, wasn't having it. She jumped into the comments like a lioness defending her cubs. "A misunderstanding," she wrote, her words sharp and precise. "Jessica, you stood in your backyard and told Ethan and Chloe that their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, died because of their bad parenting. You said it to their faces in front of 20 family members. There is no misunderstanding that. It was a cruel, calculated, and unforgivable statement, and everyone who is coddling you and making excuses right now should be deeply ashamed of themselves." The bombshell had been dropped in the public square. Within an hour, Megan's comment was deleted and she was blocked from Jessica's page. But the damage was done. The narrative had cracked wide open. Suddenly, our phones were buzzing with texts from cousins and extended family who hadn't been at the barbecue and hadn't known the full story. "Is that really what she said? Oh my God, I had no idea. Why didn't anyone tell us?" Jessica went into frantic damage control, posting again about vicious lies being spread by jealous people, and how she was being attacked during the most vulnerable time of her life. But it was too late. The truth had a foothold. My mother, seeing the public firestorm and finally understanding the depth of Jessica's cruelty and the weakness of her own silence, made her move. She wrote her own post on her own page. It was short, powerful, and clear. She talked about her own failure in prioritizing keeping the peace over protecting her grieving children. She said she was sorry for making excuses for cruelty. She didn't name Jessica, but she didn't have to. The family imploded online for everyone to see. The final act of this public drama took place a few days later, back in the real world. Mason, my brave, kind-hearted nephew, secretly rode his bike over to our house on a Saturday morning. He missed his cousin. He just wanted to talk about chess for 20 minutes. We let him in. We couldn't punish the boy for the sins of his parents. Of course they found out. Michael's SUV screeched into our driveway an hour later, and he and a very pregnant, very furious Jessica stormed up to our door. The confrontation was immediate and loud, right on our front porch. How dare you go behind our backs and try to poison our son against us? Michael yelled. But Jessica shoved past him, her face red and contorted with rage. This is why no one wants you around anymore, she shrieked, her voice echoing across the quiet suburban street. You're exhausting. Your daughter died because you weren't watching her, Chloe. You were probably too busy being depressed. And you've been making it everyone else's problem ever since. She said it again. On our porch. In our sanctuary. But this time was different. Our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a sharp-as-a-tack woman in her 70s who had never liked Jessica's entitled attitude, was in her front yard gardening. And her phone was in her hand, the little red light of the video camera glowing brightly. You should probably lower your voice, dear, Mrs. Gable called out calmly, her voice carrying easily across the lawn. You're making quite a scene. And the audio on these new phones is remarkably clear. Jessica froze, her mouth agape, realizing her mistake. They scrambled back to their car and peeled out, leaving angry black tire marks on our driveway. That evening, the video was all over our town's community Facebook page, posted by Mrs. Gable's daughter. Jessica, hugely pregnant, screaming vicious accusations at a grieving mother in her own driveway. There was no context needed. There was no spinning this. The world now saw her exactly as we did. A cruel, unhinged bully. We thought this public humiliation would surely be the end of it. How could they possibly escalate from here? We underestimated their capacity for evil, and their willingness to use the one weapon we never saw coming. The week after the video went viral was strangely, unnervingly quiet. The social media storm died down into a series of awkward, silent unfollows and unfriendings. The battle lines had been drawn in permanent ink. It seemed like those who had chosen Jessica's side had retreated into silence, likely embarrassed by the public exposure of her true, ugly character. We allowed ourselves a sliver of hope, a fragile, tentative breath. Maybe, just maybe, it was finally over. Maybe now they would crawl back into whatever hole they came from, and leave us alone to grieve in peace. That hope was shattered on a crisp Saturday morning by a sharp knock on the door. It was a process server, a bored-looking man in a cheap suit. He handed me a thick manila envelope, confirmed my name and said, "You've been served," with all the emotion of a robot. I closed the door, my hands trembling as I tore open the seal. Inside was a thick stack of legal documents, filled with dense, incomprehensible jargon. My eyes scanned the words, but my brain couldn't quite process the sheer audacity of them. Plaintiff, Jessica and Michael Miller. Defendant, Ethan and Chloe Miller. It was a lawsuit. After everything they had done to us, they were suing us. Chloe came over and read the papers over my shoulder, her breath catching in her throat in a small, horrified gasp. The allegations were a work of pure, malicious fiction. They were suing us for defamation of character, citing the maliciously edited and distributed video that had caused Jessica severe and debilitating emotional distress. They claimed her reputation in the community had been irreparably damaged, causing her to become a social recluse. But that wasn't the worst of it. They were also suing for intentional infliction of emotional distress, claiming that our refusal to forgive and move on after her minor verbal misstep, and our subsequent campaign of alienation, had caused Jessica so much stress that it was creating a high-risk pregnancy and endangering her unborn child. They were literally blaming us for any potential harm to their baby. And the final charge, the one that made me laugh out loud from the sheer insanity of it all, was alienation of familial affection. They were legally accusing us, the victims who had been pushed out, of turning the family against them. It was a strategic, vicious, and utterly baseless attack designed to do one thing: bankrupt us. It was a slap suit, a strategic lawsuit against public participation, meant to silence and punish us. They knew we didn't have the financial resources for a long, drawn-out court battle. The mountain of medical bills from Lily's accident and Chloe's surgery had already wiped out our savings account. My job was our only lifeline. They were trying to ruin us financially, to punish us for daring to speak the truth, and for not quietly accepting their abuse. I just want to take a moment here and say thank you to everyone who has stuck with this story so far. I know it's a long and heavy one. If you're still with me on this crazy journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're here. It means more than you know to not feel like I'm telling this into the void. Okay, back to the absolute nightmare. The news of the lawsuit ripped through what was left of our fractured family like a hurricane. My mother was apoplectic. She called me furious, offering to testify, to create a notarized list of every cruel thing Jessica had ever said or done over the past decade. "Let them bring it," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "I'm done being quiet." Megan called, crying, apologizing that her family was putting us through this hell. Other relatives, however, took their side. An uncle, the same one who had held me back at the barbecue, called and told me we should have just handled things privately, and that by letting it get so public, we had brought this on ourselves. He thought a lawsuit was a reasonable response to a viral video. We were terrified. We spent the entire weekend huddled over the kitchen table, which was now covered in threatening legal papers, trying to figure out how we were going to fight this. We felt like we were drowning in a sea of lies and legal fees. Jessica and Michael hadn't just declared war. They had launched a full-scale invasion, and we were totally outgunned. We had no choice but to lawyer up, to drain what little was left in our 401k to pay a retainer fee. But as we prepared for the fight of our lives, my brother would make one last, desperate visit, a visit that would change the entire course of the conflict. What could he possibly have to say now that could make any difference? Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Catherine, was a beacon of sanity in our sea of chaos. We sat in her sterile, imposing conference room, the stack of Jessica's ludicrous allegations sitting between us. After reviewing the video, the text messages, and the detailed timeline Chloe had been keeping, she was blunt. "They don't have a case," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the complaint. "Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. You have multiple witnesses and a video recording. This is a joke." "But," she added, her eyes meeting mine, "it's a very expensive joke. This isn't a legal strategy. It's a strategy of intimidation. They want to bury you in legal fees and discovery motions until you're forced to issue a public apology just to make it stop." She was right. It was financial warfare, and we were the ones on the verge of ruin. A few days before our first scheduled deposition, my brother showed up at our house. Alone. It was late, after 9 p.m., and a cold rain was starting to fall. When I saw him through the peephole, a solitary, haggard figure under our flickering porch light, every instinct screamed at me to keep the door locked. Let him stand in the rain. But something in his posture, a deep-seated exhaustion that seemed to pull his shoulders toward the ground, made me open it. "I'm not here to fight," he said quickly, before I could say a word, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Can I please just talk to you for 5 minutes, Ethan? Please." I stepped out onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind me to shield Chloe and the kids from whatever was about to happen. The air was cold and damp. "You're suing us, Michael. You're actively trying to destroy our lives. What could we possibly have to talk about?" He slumped against the porch railing, the fight completely gone out of him. He ran a hand over his tired, unshaven face. "That was Jessica's idea," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Well, her mother's really. They're convinced you're on a mission to destroy her reputation. We're on a mission to be left alone." I shot back, my voice laced with ice. "A mission you and your wife seem intent on making impossible." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a misery I hadn't seen before, not even in the darkest days after Lily died. "Mason won't talk to me," he said, his voice cracking. He overheard me and Jessica talking about the lawsuit on the phone with her mother. He came to my room last night and said I was a coward. He said I was a coward for not standing up to his mom when she said what she said about Lily. He said Grandpa would be ashamed of me. My own son thinks I'm a coward. The question hung in the cold night air between us, sharp and pointed. "Aren't you?" He flinched as if I'd struck him, but for the first time he didn't deny it. He just shook his head slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the stubble on his cheek. "I knew it was wrong, Ethan," he admitted, his voice so quiet I had to lean in to hear it over the rain. The second the words came out of her mouth at the barbecue, I knew it was a monstrous, unforgivable thing to say. "But she's my wife. She was carrying my child." I froze. I didn't know what to do. "You were supposed to be my brother." The words erupted out of me, raw and full of months of pent-up pain and betrayal. "You were supposed to be a decent human being. You were supposed to tell your wife she was wrong. You were supposed to protect us, your family who were on the ground bleeding. You were supposed to choose what was right, not what was easy. Easy. He let out a bitter, humorless laugh that turned into a sob. You think any of this has been easy? My marriage is a wreck. My son hates me. My own mother and sister barely speak to me. The baby cries all the time and Jessica. She just gets angrier and angrier. This has been the hardest year of my life. I'm living in a nightmare. Then wake up, I said, my voice suddenly calm, the anger replaced by a cold finality. Drop the lawsuit. If you know it's wrong, then end it. Be the man your son wants you to be. He looked away, staring out at the dark, rain-slicked street. I can't, he whispered. Her mother is paying for the lawyer. She's threatened to cut us off completely. If I back out now, she'll leave. She'll take the kids, and her parents will fund her fight to make sure I never see them again. And there it was. The final pathetic truth. He wasn't protecting his wife out of love or loyalty. He was placating a bully out of fear. He had made his choice a long time ago at that barbecue. He had chosen to live in a prison of his own making rather than stand up for what was right. He had traded his integrity for a fragile, miserable peace. You've made your choice, Michael, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the anger I felt just moments before. All I felt now was a profound, sad pity for the weak man standing in front of me. Now you have to live with it. I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me. Through the window, I saw him stand there in the rain for a long time before finally getting in his car and driving away into the darkness. I didn't know it then, but that was the last time I would ever speak to my brother face to face. The next communication we had would be handled entirely by lawyers, and it would change everything. 2 days after Michael's pathetic, rain-soaked confession on our porch, our lawyer called. Good morning, Ethan, Catherine said, her voice crisp and professional, but I could hear a note of satisfaction in it. They want to settle. I was stunned into silence. After all the aggression, all the threats, all the money we had spent, they were just giving up? What's the catch? I asked, suspicious. They're offering to drop the lawsuit entirely with prejudice, meaning they can never file it again, she explained. In exchange, they want a legally binding, mutual no-contact agreement. It was essentially a restraining order for a family. It would forbid either party from contacting the other in any way. No calls, no texts, no social media interaction, no showing up at homes, schools, or workplaces. It would be a legal wall, 10 feet high and topped with barbed wire between our two families. And she added, the most painful part, it would include the children until they turned 18. Chloe and I spent the entire evening discussing it, weighing the pros and cons. Part of me, the part that still remembered building forts and trading baseball cards with the brother I grew up with, felt a deep, profound pang of sadness. This was so final. It was the legal death of our family, the official document declaring it over. The agreement would mean Mason and Noah couldn't see each other, couldn't even text about chess or video games. It felt like we were punishing the children for the unforgivable sins of their parents. But the other part of me, the part that was a husband and a father who had been living under siege for 6 months, felt an overwhelming full-body sense of relief. A legal wall meant no more harassment at school. No more anonymous, terrifying calls to CPS. No more showing up at our door to scream accusations. It was a guarantee of peace. It was a paper shield that would finally protect us. Lily would want us to be safe, Chloe said finally, her eyes filled with tears but her voice firm with a strength that amazed me every day. She would want her brothers and sister to grow up in a home where they aren't afraid, where they don't have to walk on eggshells. This isn't what we wanted, but maybe it's what we need. We signed the papers the next day in Catherine's office. The stroke of the pen felt both heavy and light. The war was finally over. That first Thanksgiving without the looming dread of a toxic family gathering was peaceful. It was strange at first, the quiet. But then our new family started to arrive. We started a new tradition. We invited Megan and her new boyfriend, a kind, funny guy who looked at her with pure adoration. We invited Laura, the cousin Jessica had wronged years ago, and her husband and their miracle baby they'd adopted. My mother came, quiet and humbled, and her famous sweet potato casserole, which she placed on the counter next to a dish Chloe had made, tasted like a peace offering. We invited Mrs. Gable from next door, who brought a bottle of wine and gossip from the neighborhood. A few other close friends filled the remaining chairs. Our house was full, not with people we were related to by blood and bound to by obligation, but with people we were connected to by choice and mutual respect. It was a family forged in fire. The conversation was easy, the laughter was genuine. No one was walking on eggshells. No one was waiting for the next passive-aggressive bomb to drop. Life slowly began to find its new peaceful rhythm. The quiet that had once felt like loss now felt like serenity. Our children, freed from the constant, subtle criticism and tension, started to thrive. Noah started a chess club at the local community center, teaching younger kids the game he loved. Mia found a passion for painting, her canvases exploding with the vibrant color that had been missing from our lives for so long. They were happy, genuinely happy. 6 months after we signed the agreement, we got a formal letter from our lawyer. It was a notification that Michael and Jessica had finalized their divorce. The details were messy and public, filled with accusations from both sides. We felt nothing but a distant, detached sadness for the wreckage they had left in their wake, especially for their children. A few days later, a school counselor called Chloe. Mason, my brave, wonderful nephew, had asked her to pass along a message. He wanted to know if it would be okay to write to us and his cousins when he turned 18. Chloe, with tears in her eyes, told the counselor to tell him that we would be waiting, and that we loved him very much. We had lost a family, yes, the one we were born into. But in its place we had built something stronger, something healthier, something real. We were no longer defined by the family that had tried to break us, but by the one we had built to save ourselves. But what was the ultimate lesson in all of this? What message could we possibly take away from such a devastating, life-altering experience? The answer was simpler and more profound than I could have ever imagined. The journey we went through was the hardest of our lives. It was a trial by fire that burned away everything we thought we knew about the meaning of family, loyalty, and forgiveness. We lost our precious daughter, and in the devastating aftermath, we lost the family we thought would be there to catch us. But looking back now from the quiet peace of our new life, I realized that what we gained was far more valuable than what we lost. We learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to protect them from other parts of your family. We learned that the old saying, blood is thicker than water, is a phrase people often use as a weapon to excuse toxic behavior, to demand loyalty where none is deserved. And we learned that you have every right to say no. Setting boundaries isn't an act of aggression or selfishness. It's an act of self-preservation. It's teaching your children that their peace, their safety, and their mental well-being are more important than keeping a cruel person comfortable. We also learned that family isn't about shared DNA or a shared last name. It's about shared values. It's about the people who show up when you're at your absolute worst, when your house is a mess and your eyes are red from crying. It's the neighbor who sees an injustice and bravely chooses to record it. It's the sister who finds her voice, even if it means alienating the rest of the family. It's the cousin who understands your pain because she's lived it too. It's the friends who become your chosen family, who fill your home with laughter on a holiday that could have been steeped in loneliness. The ghost of our old family still lingers sometimes. I see it in my son's eyes when he mentions a funny memory of his cousin. I feel it when a holiday rolls around and the old obligations are no longer there. But the grief for that lost family is no longer sharp. It's been replaced by a quiet strength, and a deep, profound gratitude for the peace we fought so hard to win. Our daughter Lily's memory is no longer a weapon that can be used against us. Instead, it has become our compass. Her short, beautiful, vibrant life taught us the profound value of unconditional love and kindness, and her tragic death taught us the devastating cost of jealousy and cruelty. In honoring her, we had to redefine our lives. We had to choose to walk away from the darkness and build a life worthy of her bright, shining spirit. A life of peace, integrity, and chosen love. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story from beginning to end. It's been a long and emotional road, and sharing it helps, it really does. If you have been through anything similar, if you've ever had to make that impossible choice to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your own peace, please share your experience in the comments below. Reading your stories helps all of us feel a little less alone in these struggles. And finally, if this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you know, and allows me to continue sharing these important stories. Thank you again for being here. Be kind to yourselves and be safe.